O kia ora, ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa, e ngā mana whenua ki tēnei rohi, Ngāti Whātua Ōrāki, tēnā koutou katoa. Ngā tamariki mā ki St Thomas's kura, tino pai, ngā mihi. Rorangatira mā, ana hoe wha, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Greetings everybody. I want to acknowledge Ngāti Whātua as the mana whenua of this place, and I also want to acknowledge the St Thomas School for what was just a fantastic kapahaka, and give them another round of applause because that was great. We were just debating on the way up. Unfortunately, I have to fly back to Wellington for this little thing called Parliament and Question Time this afternoon, and we were debating the balance of how much I spoke and how much Jack interviewed me, and given the need for politicians to stay on side with the media, thank you very much. No, so we'll get Jack up here in just a few minutes so that we can have a little bit of Q&A before I do have to head away. But can I just thank the Financial Services Council for another opportunity to be here and spend some time with you. Vanya, I noticed your introduction around sex, drugs and politics, in which I should be talking about. I seem to spend quite a lot of time talking about the first two nowadays, so I will stick to politics for the third one for today. But it is a great honour to be given this chance. And actually, you will imagine that I'm particularly pleased that the focus today is around towards wellbeing, because it's been such an enormous part of the focus for our government. And what I'm really pleased about is the fact that this concept of wellbeing, this idea of looking more broadly at what it is that defines our success as a country and as people, is taking hold. It's not, as some would like to tell you, some fluffy idea where we sit around on beanbags and debate yoga posture. It is actually a serious endeavour at understanding who we are as a country and what we can do together to succeed. So I really welcome the fact that the Financial Services Council is focused on it. I also want to acknowledge, and you'll be hearing from Angie Mentis from BNZ a little bit later on today, around their wellbeing report and index that they've released today. That to me is a really important contribution. The last thing I want is that the idea of wellbeing and a wellbeing approach is something that is just held by the government or even one political party or one minister. This has to be something that's embraced by the community, by business, by government and by local government, in order for us to actually be able to make the big differences that I think are possible. A government doesn't define a person's wellbeing. A person's wellbeing can only come from their own capabilities being enhanced and their ability to do the things that give them a feeling of purpose and meaning and put balance into their lives. But what a government can do is, if it puts at the centre of what it does that goal of enhancing a person's capability to live a life of meaning and purpose and balance, then we can make a very big difference to that. And that's what we've done from day one of being in government. So you've all heard about the wellbeing budget, or at least I hope you have anyway. It is based around the Treasury's Living Standards framework. That is based in turn on 4 capitals: financial, human, natural and social. Or, if you're not an economist, money, people, the environment and communities. Our job is to make sure that our approach to government balances those things, understands the importance of all of them, understands that economic prosperity matters and we must invest in that, but equally understand that the health and well-being of our people, the protection and the enhancement of our environment and the strengthening of our communities are the bedrock to allowing us to achieve our potential as people and as a country. In our wellbeing budget, we produced New Zealand's first wellbeing outlook. And that included all of the detail you would expect in a budget about our fiscal position, about where we are on debt, where we're going in terms of surpluses. All good news, by the way, in the budget. But in addition to that, an outlook around who we are and where we are as people. And it actually mirrors what Angie's going to talk to you about a bit later on. Overall, New Zealand does well. If we compare ourselves to the rest of the world when it comes to levels of educational attainment, connections in terms of politics, we do well, we exceed. But there are large gaps. There are big inequities in terms of people's well-being. And what we did with that wellbeing outlook is we took the evidence from that and that's what we decided to invest in. So in this week of all weeks, you will have noticed that the biggest investment we made in new spending in that budget was on mental health. And I am extremely proud of that, because for too long, as a country, we have not focused on our overall mental well-being. This is an issue that there is no person in this room unaffected by. I guarantee it. Either yourself, a family member, a friend, a work colleague. It's time we took it seriously for all of our future good. It's also an economic issue. In 2017, a report was released that said that the New Zealand economy had lost $12 billion in productivity because of mental health and mental unwellness. So whichever way you look at it, it is important that we address it, and that's why we put a $1.9 billion program at the core of our project in this wellbeing budget. But it's a really good example of the fact that if we take on the big issues and challenges for wellbeing, they're not going to be solved in one cycle. This whole wellbeing approach is predicated on intergenerational wellbeing, taking on the issues that will fundamentally shift and change New Zealand, and that's what we've done. So in the budget you'll see mental health. You'll also see the future of work, the changing nature of technology, climate change, how we address the inequity between Māori and Pacifica populations and the rest of the population, and child well-being, reducing child poverty. And we've got that. There are specific indicators. We are measuring what we are doing, and that is the way that we will be able to show that we've made progress on well-being. So I'm really proud of that budget, and I'm really pleased that others are now getting on board with the idea of how to take this forward. Within the business community and within this community, and I'll skip out most of the speech now and just move to a couple of points that are specific to this community. You're going to hear from Minister Whāwhoi tonight around the conduct review work and so on, so I'm not going to go into that. But I want to say what I think it means. It's about the idea of social licence. And my challenge to all of the financial service professionals in this room today is that you need to rebuild social licence. In most cases, in almost all cases, it's not your fault. It's not something you've done personally, but it is about a form of social capital, the connections that we have in our community to one another, the critical and important role that you all play in building those connections by the financing that you provide, by the work that you do in supporting people's financial security. It's a really important form of social capital that I believe has been undermined over recent years. We've all got a responsibility to help rebuild that. And so my challenge is keep going on that work. Don't think of it in the negative regulatory sense. Think of it in the sense of building social capital, of creating communities that are strong and resilient and financially secure. I want to mention just in closing two very specific points that I know are of interest to people in the room. The first of those is the future of KiwiSaver. We want KiwiSaver to grow. We want more people to be in KiwiSaver. There is a very important review out at the moment, and it's only got a week to go. So if you haven't submitted to it, please do. And it picks up many of the issues that are in the KiwiSaver 250 document that's been released today. The first of those is how do we use KiwiSaver to deepen New Zealand's capital markets? We want to do that. We want to make sure that more of New Zealanders' own savings are being spent here, and we are open for business on ideas of how to do that. We also want to see more focus around sustainable investment, not as some kind of requirement necessarily, but as a goal that we should all have, to do responsible and sustainable investment that grows not only our prosperity, but that protects our environment. And I stood on the stage last year and said that we were setting up the Green Investment Fund. That we hope will make its first investments towards the end of this year. In the budget, we put in place the Venture Capital Fund to fill that gap in the Series A and Series B funding rounds. $300 million. That legislation for that is now before Parliament. We're doing our bit with the KiwiSaver review. We want to see the way in which we can develop those capital markets, the way that we can enhance New Zealanders' dignity in retirement with their savings. And we also want to look at the way in which our default providers operate. What kind of mandate should they have? Should we look at different mandates for different ages? Should we have less of a focus on conservative funds? All of that is up now for your input. And I thank the Financial Services Council for the work that you've done already in that, and I encourage you to do more. So ladies and gentlemen, for me today, it's really important to thank you for focusing on wellbeing, to encourage you to continue to develop that and develop your social licence in building social capital, and to encourage you to continue to work with us to develop KiwiSaver and the other initiatives that are so important in making sure we have economic and financial prosperity for the future. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Te rangatira o te pūtea, the boss of the money. You've got 10 minutes, so I'm just going to rip into things, and I will start with some curly questions. Social agencies, 2 years into your tenure in government, report no noticeable changes to poverty levels. Kiwi Bank economists estimate the housing shortage in New Zealand will hit 150,000 next year. You've stuck to your debt targets. You are returning surpluses. How is that consistent with a wellbeing approach?
Oh, it's very consistent with it. I firstly would challenge a little bit of those numbers. We probably don't have time to have a long debate about it, but if you actually look in the wellbeing budget, you will see that we have held ourselves to account on those. Let's just take the example of child poverty. So we've said we've got targets to reduce that. We are meeting that. Around 74,000 children will be lifted out of poverty as a result of the initiatives that we're doing. What you are highlighting is that these are big long-term challenges. No one's going to fix the housing crisis in 2 years, but we've built more social housing in 2 years than any government has since the late 1970s. So, no, I'm proud of what we've done. But in terms of the consistency of having a position around fiscal sustainability as part of wellbeing, I don't back off that. We've actually put a lot more money in than the previous government had intended, and even we had intended in 2018. But making sure that we have long-term fiscal sustainability is actually important to the well-being of future generations. So like everything in life, it's about striking a balance, but we believe we've got that balance about right. Having said all of that, we keep an eye on the global economic environment. We lifted our spending in budget 19 because we could see what was coming, and we'll continue to do that. But it's about a balance, and intergenerational wellbeing requires us to be responsible with our finances.
Let's talk about the global outlook then. Where do you see things going over the next couple of years? I mean, over the next couple of months alone, we are facing...
How about tomorrow?
Turmoil like we haven't experienced.
It is a very dynamic situation. I woke up this morning to see that President Trump had fired his national security advisor again. I wake up most mornings and check my Twitter feed just to see what's happening. Look, it is, in all seriousness, we are seeing an environment where there is a global downturn. The IMF have reduced their global growth forecasts from a year ago by nearly 1%. They're likely to downgrade that again. The US-China trade war is causing problems, particularly in the supply chain in Southeast Asia, and that's floating back down to New Zealand as well. We've got whatever it is that's happening with Brexit. So all of that together creates that environment of uncertainty. We are an open export-based economy, and so it is of no surprise that will affect us. The good news is we're well positioned to deal with it. So those low debt levels, the fact that we've got a surplus, is actually what allows us to deal with a potential economic shock like we have. And so, I'm as concerned as anyone in this room is about the global economy and where it's going, but I also know we're well positioned to deal with it.
There will be people in this room, though, who say that the flow-on effects from a slowing global economy are not being helped at the moment by regulation in the financial services space, and that you are putting pain upon pain.
Well, you'll be shocked to hear, Jack, I disagree with that premise. I don't think we are at all. What we're doing in terms of the financial services industry is we're working through a process to get ourselves to a point where we are all confident about the culture, the conduct and the structure of these industries. We value it. We value the work that's done by the people in this room, but we've also got to make sure that New Zealanders have confidence. And as I said in my speech, I'm not blaming any individual in this room.
Who do you blame?
I'm not going to go there, but I am going to say, well, no, I'll give you this. I am going to say that when we took a look at the Royal Commission on Banking in Australia and looked at what that meant for New Zealand, the good news was that Rob Everett, who's here in the Reserve Bank, had a good look at New Zealand's banking system and said, by and large, all right, there's a few things. As we started to move a bit further outside that into areas like life insurance and so on, the picture became more murky. And the truth is that all of us have a need to be able to lift our game in that regard. And then subsequent to that, we've seen some issues with a specific bank and that have arisen, and those are ones we have to take seriously, and they are being taken seriously. But as I say, I'm not going to blame anybody in particular. What I am going to say is we've all got a responsibility to make it better, and regulation will be a part of that. But it's smart regulation. It's regulation that we need, that will lift confidence, that will actually see people more inclined to use all these great people in this room to help invest their money.
Okay. I know your coalition partners, and particularly Winston Peters, still support a Royal Commission into banking. If that turns out to be a deal breaker come next year's election, what do you do?
Well, a lot of assumptions in that question, Jack.
Well, I mean, it's something he's talked about a lot, of something the Greens still support.
Yeah, look, we've made clear that we believe that if we undertook a Royal Commission now, all that would do is delay us actually taking action. We have the ability to learn the lessons from the Australian Royal Commission, add that to the culture and conduct inquiry work that has been done by the FMA and the Reserve Bank, and actually make changes. And that's what we're in the process of doing, and everyone here will get to hear from Minister Farfoy about that tonight. But I think if we undertook that inquiry now, all we would do is delay action. In the future, hypothetical discussions that might take place, we'll look at that. But again, that's the reason why I issued the challenge. We've got to get on and do it and make sure people can see meaningful change in order to build that social licence.
I want to pick up on something else you said. New Zealand capital markets. I mean, there's still an aversion, certainly for domestic investors, to investing in New Zealand businesses. I know the capital gains tax didn't pass, but how do we deepen capital markets in New Zealand?
Well, we just had the capital markets review out this week, and there's some interesting ideas in that, particularly around KiwiSaver and the way that KiwiSaver works. We're also, as I said in my speech, out consulting now specifically on how we can use KiwiSaver to do that. I think the opportunity is there for us if we can get a focus on a bit longer term. And then there's the skin in the game that we're putting in, and I mentioned that the $300 million that we've put in for the Venture Capital Fund is the government saying we can see a gap here and we're going to fill it. Similarly with the Green Investment Fund, that's the government stepping up. So I feel like we are doing our bit to do that, but we'll look at the recommendations of the Capital Markets Review and continue to do what we can to see that money invested here on shore.
OCR's had a big cut. We're expecting more cuts in the coming months. What's going to be the impact of that?
Yeah, look, I think everybody had costed in a 25 basis point cut. I suspect the Reserve Bank Governor decided to apply the monetary policy defibrillator and make it 50 to give everybody a little bit of a sit up and notice moment, and I think that happened. The good news for New Zealand is that if the Reserve Bank Governor goes there, and it's his decision, not mine, there is room. There's still room for him to be moving in terms of monetary policy. So it plays a role. It certainly had by the looks of what I've read, an impact on the currency in particular. But my job is to look at the other side of the shop, which is fiscal policy. And fiscal and monetary policy do have to work together. And as I said, in Budget 19, we significantly lifted our new operating spending, our new capital spending, because we wanted to get ahead of the curve. I suspect that's what Adrian Orr's trying to do as well, is get ahead of the curve. He actually said when he made the OCR announcement, he was confident in the New Zealand economy. I'm confident in the New Zealand economy, but we've got to work together to make sure we get through this period with these international headwinds.
Are you concerned about capital requirements and the impact on the rural sector?
I'm continuing to work with both the Reserve Bank and with the trading banks around their views on that. I think everybody in this scenario agrees we need to make sure we don't allow a situation where circa global financial crisis, not here in New Zealand but elsewhere, what we saw with the finance companies was what we saw here, but in terms of banks. So we all want adequate capital levels. The debate probably centres largely around how big and how fast. That's the discussion I've encouraged the Reserve Bank and the trading banks to have. We are still in that process. It is an independent decision of the Reserve Bank, but I'm just encouraging everybody to work together, again, to ensure New Zealanders have got confidence. And that's my job, is to make sure that the system is effective and efficient for people, and we have a safe banking system. It's the Reserve Bank Governor's job to implement that, and I'm just encouraging everybody to work together towards that end.
I know a lot of people of my generation are concerned about the ticking superannuation time bomb. What's your view on compulsory savings for all New Zealanders?
Yeah, look, it's not the Labor Party's policy, but you mentioned coalition partners earlier on. I want to see as many New Zealanders saving as possible. I've said in this forum before in previous years, the interesting issue for me is, we have a bit over 3 million Kiwi savers at the moment, but we've still got a bit over 1 million who don't. Those people, many of them didn't when we had more generous incentives in place. So we have to look again at how we do that. We're not moving as a government or a party to compulsion anytime soon, but we've got to continue to work on the ways of getting people to invest.
You talk about the importance of improving social capital, especially in this space. What would be your advice for organisations looking to improve social capital given the degradation of the last few years?
Well, I would look, and again, it's not really for me, but I would look closely at some of the things that have emerged in both our own conduct inquiry here and what's come out of Australia. And I know this is understood in the room. We've got to put the customer back at the centre of what's been done. We've got to make sure that the conduct deals with problems when they arise, not allow them to fester, and have the systems and processes in place to be able to deal with that. And we've got to look at our broader role in encouraging those big goals of well-being. And that's why I'm so pleased that this is the theme here, because if you take, for example, if you take an approach focused on well-being, you'll automatically find yourself at responsible and sustainable investment frameworks, because there's no way of getting that balance between the natural capital and the financial capital right unless you're prepared to look at those frameworks. And we've seen some really good things happen in New Zealand. I mean, I look at where the New Zealand Super Fund is today in terms of its investment approach. It's still getting great returns, and it's taking a much more sustainable investment framework. So that's another area I'll encourage people to go to.
You've got to go in just a minute, but a couple of great questions have been sent through via the app. So ACC, KiwiSaver and the New Zealand Super Fund have about $180 billion, but we only invest 9% of that in New Zealand. What sectors in New Zealand do you think there is a particular capacity for growth in that space?
Oh, look, I think it's just about endless. The person in the question there has mentioned the tech sector, and that's clearly an area where it is. I also see an enormous opportunity for New Zealand to invest in the new and clean technologies. That's why we did the Green Investment Fund. I mean, getting on with addressing our climate change requirements is important because it's important for the planet, and it's important because we've made agreements with the world, but it's also a massive opportunity for us. We're good at innovation. We're good at, for example, the agriculture sector. Why are we not putting those two things together more quickly? So the first of David Parker and now Phil Twyford's industry transformation plans is in the agri-tech sector, because we think there's huge opportunity to build that, just as there is in clean energy. We've just released a green paper on the hydrogen economy. Huge opportunity in there for New Zealand to produce green hydrogen, which the world wants. So I think it is in making sure it's where we build on our advantages and add value here in New Zealand.
I think it's time for you to scurry back to Wellington. Finance Minister Grant Robertson, thanks for your time.
Sure.